welcome to the first professional critique group. My name is Brad Pauquette, and this is Alli Prince. We're so glad that you guys are here. So we are recording this session. And actually, Alli, if you could double check and make sure that it is recording, that'd be great. Awesome. So here's the rules. Like, if you talk, you're going to be on the recording. All right. So you don't have to talk and you will be solidly not in the recording. And this won't be quite as interactive as a regular workshop, but at some point, if you want to ask a question, will you please drop a note in the chat and just say, like, I have a question or something like that. And then we'll recognize you and you can have a chance to ask a question or whatever you'd like to do. So before we dig in, let's pray. So, Lord Jesus, we just thank you so much for being here with us. Father, I thank you for this group of people that you've assembled. Father, I pray that the feedback that we give tonight, the critique that we give would be good and helpful, that it would bear fruit, Lord, that it would honor you, that it would spur these writers who have, given of themselves and taken this risk to be a part of this feedback session, that it would spur them on to greater things, Lord, that it would help them mission you've assigned to them. So Lord, we just thank you that you have prepared good works in advance for us to do, and that we each get to play our part in that tonight. And so we just praise your name. We bless you and thank you, Father. Amen.
Amen.
Cool. So as I mentioned ago, my name is Brad Pauquette. I've been doing publishing stuff for about 15 years now. I guess a little longer than that because I've been saying 15 years for a while, I guess. Eventually those numbers go up, right? And so exciting news. I have a book coming out in July called The Novel Matrix. So if any of you guys have taken any of the Novel Matrix courses or Archeer and things like that, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear any feedback or testimonials that you have to provide. But also, I'm going to be doing some pre-release stuff with that. We're also toying with an idea of a novel writing class this summer. So if you want to be a part of any of that, if that sounds interesting, make sure that you're on the appropriate mailing list. So really my mailing list, bradpocket.com, or the company mailing list at writers.company, or even Alli's mailing list, you're probably going to get a lot of the same notifications. You should probably join all three though, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Especially mine.
exactly. Yeah, if you could only do one, make it Alli's. And I actually look way taller than you in this video, but in real life, we're like the same height. You guys deserve to know that. Full transparency. So, Alli, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Allie. I'm Allie Prince. I'm a second year apprentice at the company. Um,
You probably talk about Lawless,
yeah.
like,
I recently led a project called Lawless, which was super fun and exciting. A bunch of authors came together and wrote short stories inspired by the Book of Judges. I run a weekly blog talking about writing encouragement, stuff like that.
yeah, awesome.
Mhm.
So, alliprince.com if you want to check that out. Um, and so tonight we're going to critique these stories, which should be a lot of fun. It's a little bit different than we've done it in the past. It'll be a little more centralized, and so we'll give all of the critique tonight. And we have five people that have
Mhm.
submitted work to be critiqued, which I think is just super brave of you. So
Absolutely.
well done. Thank you for giving of yourself. One of the things that excites me is that you're providing an opportunity for other people to learn through your work, right? And I would say learn from your mistakes, but it's not all mistakes, right? They get to learn
Mhm.
from the things that you've done well in your work as well. So thank you for sharing of yourself. And Paul talks about First Corinthians. He talks about there's many parts but one body. And so tonight, Alli and I, the part that we are the givers of critique. We can use the experience and skills and knowledge that the Lord has blessed us with to bless the body in that way. And you guys that have submitted work tonight, that's the part that you get to play. And it's not that anybody is above or below anybody else, but we just each have our turn to play these roles. And so I look forward to the day that each of you eventually will be, in this place, and then I can go to you for critique. So with that said, our goal here tonight, and one of the reasons that workshops are difficult is we want to set a really high standard for your work. Oftentimes writers' workshops um, suffer from too low of a standard because the fact is that one in 10,000 short stories or novels are actually exceptional, actually achieve, our dreams with them. About one in 1,000 manuscripts that pursue traditional publishing will actually get a publishing contract. And about one in 10 of those will actually, outperform its advance and do really well. And we see the same thing actually in self-publishing. The statistics are almost identical. About 1 in 1,000 self-published books, does okay. It has a good showing. It's a building block for the author, and about 1 in 10,000 actually have some kind of breakout success. Where the author is making like quick quit your job kind of money with it. So our goal is to help you attain that level. And so, as we talk, I think Christian workshops in particular struggle with that because we want to be really kind and encouraging to each other, which is totally good, right? That's a great way for us to behave towards one another. But we're just going to give it to you straight up. Okay, we're just going to
Mhm.
tell you exactly what we see in your work here so that you can improve as efficiently as possible. So you don't have to like wonder, were they telling me the whole truth? Were they sugarcoating it? We're not. We're going to tell you exactly what we see. So we don't intend any meanness or condescension, when we give that feedback, but we understand that that's what you come for. Like so many writers, if we're honest, we yearn for that, right? Like
Mhm.
somebody just tell me what I've done wrong so I can fix it, so I can stop guessing. So that's what we're here to do tonight. We are going to have some fun with it. That's just the kind of people that we are. But those any jokes that are made are not intended to be at your expense. So again, I want to thank you guys all for playing and participating, and for everybody else that's listening. You can download all the stories and novel chapters on the company website, writers.company, for free, so that you can follow along. I think there's a lot to learn by, you critique it on your end, and then compare what you found to what we found. And then when you have that information, compare that to your existing work. And again, learn through these examples so that you can apply, these techniques and things to your own work. So did I miss anything, Allie?
I don't think so.
All right, excellent. So again, if you have questions, or you want to participate in another fashion, just drop a note in the chat first, and then as space allows, Allie will invite you into the
Mhm.
conversation. So, as I stumble over my words, we are of course recording this live, and so for future generations, we hope that you enjoy it too in the future. Hopefully, not the future depicted in any of these stories, actually. So we're gonna start with Hannah Shoop. So Hannah is in Alabama, I think, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Cool. And so she's been hanging around for a while. She did the ARC Year class a couple years ago. And so thank you for letting us read your work, Hannah. And if you like it, Hannah has books out on Amazon as well. So, Allie, do you want to read like the first couple paragraphs there for us?
Sure. Chapter 1. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Walt Disney. So, would you like to have dinner with me? The curly haired young man pushed the glasses up his nose. Do one more.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, okay. Julia blinked, searching for words. Gratitude to be standing behind the counter flitted through her brain. He couldn't see her clenched fist. She uncurled her fingers and brushed her sweaty palm on her pants. How to be clear but not bruise him? She bit her lip.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Allie. So what we have here and what we were told in the note that accompanied it is that this is the first chapter of a romantic comedy. And so, as I experience a piece like this, as I explore it, there are certain things that, based on just the genre that I'm told that it is, that I'm expecting. So, for instance, this genre typically has quite a bit of what I call girl talk. And I think Michelle needs that is on the call. She'll enjoy that term as well. But it's like where the narrator is, or the main character protagonist is sort of talking to themselves in there. So we see like some of those
Mhm.
typical things from the genre in here. But Allie, why don't you get us started?
Okay.
What are some of your thoughts? What did you find in here?
I thought that some of the dialogue was a little confusing to keep track of. I didn't always know necessarily who was speaking.
Mhm.
So for example, on the first page, we have this he arched his eyebrows and dipped his head. Yikes. I don't know if that's like her internally or if that's him saying that or if it's like her saying that.
Yeah, that's a good note. I have that note as well.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, and so there is some of the dialogue which seems to just kind of float,
Mm,
right? And so a common writing rule that we hear is don't begin your story with dialogue, right? And
mhm,
the way that we treat rules here at the company is they're useful when they're useful. And so like if the story works, it's fine to break rules. You can break rules all day long. But when something isn't working, we turn back to those rules and we say, is there a good explanation for that? And so here, right off the bat, the story begins with, so would you like to have dinner with me? And that sort of illustrates the reason why we don't start stories with dialogue, because we have no idea who's saying that or where
mhm,
we are, right? We're out in the middle of space. We're in a vacuum right now. And somebody just started talking. And so we don't know what that voice sounds like or how to imagine that scene. So we have a line like that. And then, at the bottom of page one,
mhm.
it says, Julia focused on the foaming flower in front of her. Satisfied, she slid the cup and saucer across the counter. Beautiful, like you. Now, because of the way that that's structured, typically if a character takes an action and then there's a line of dialogue directly after that action, our assumption as readers is going to be that the dialogue belongs to the most recent actor. And so, but here in this case, actually, if we push through and see the context, it's actually the other character that is saying that line of dialogue. So we have some other examples of sort of yeah, dialogue that is just not quite tracking with where it belongs
Mhm.
in the story. So we need a little bit better maintenance of those dialogue tags in order to keep track of it. What else did you see, Allie?
Something I really liked about the story was kind of the stakes. She wanted a relationship, but she didn't want it with the guy that was asking her out. That was something that was interesting to me, but I didn't feel like there was enough of it. I wanted to lean into that more. I wanted to know more about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mhm,
And I think, one of the questions that I teach these apprentices to ask when you critique a novel chapter,
mhm,
there are two questions we ask at the end of it. One is, do you know what kind of story you're reading by the end of the first chapter? And the second is, would you pay money to continue reading the story? And here, we definitely know what kind of story we're reading,
yeah,
right? It kind
definitely.
of like we talked
Mhm,
about a moment ago, it hits some of the marks for rom com. But at the same time, it does fail to develop stakes.
mhm,
While I know generally what kind of story I'm reading, I don't know what good thing or what terribly bad thing might happen if the protagonist isn't successful in the thing she's attempting to do.
right. Yeah. We don't even know who she wants. It's just this mysterious him,
Right.
you know?
Right, and I think that we have some really good, development of Julia here. I have a
Mhm,
sense of who Julia is as a person, but none of the scenes really develop into a scene beyond that. So we're getting a
mhm,
lot of character, but not a lot of plot here. So we kinda have these snapshots of Julia going about her business, which again is
mhm,
helpful to help
for
us
sure.
see Julia, and there's some good showing writing in here that helps us to see Julia. But at the same time, we never get to that fully developed scene where we know what's at stake, what good or bad thing might happen.
Mhm.
And part of that too is that we're missing physical descriptions of characters.
So that
And I think that's going to be a note that we see recurring throughout many of the pieces tonight is a lack of physical descriptions, that proper maintenance hasn't been paid to help the reader really visualize the spaces and the people in those spaces.
Mhm,
One issue that I had as well that prevented me from really getting hooked into the story is Julia is so morally neutral in this story. Not like typically, we teach the save the cat moment, which is like the character should do something that connects us in a positive fashion to them in that first chapter. But we open on Julia rebuffing this guy. And what's interesting to me is that we don't even know why.
mm,
We
mhm,
never learn, like, like, if he was a jerk, even that alone, that information alone, that there's something that, we could kind of universally agree that rejecting this guy was the right move, that would turn that potentially at least into a more sympathetic or more positive experience with Julia. But right now, she rejects a guy who seems to be a nice guy. And then, she has some other encounters, none of which, again, have any real positive or negative moral outcome associated with them.
yeah, I agree.
Um, and so my last note here, I did like, if you guys have the download, One of the things that we teach is to use slashes to fill in missing information, which Hannah has given us good examples of here. And I mean that genuinely. So that's a technique. If you know you need to research something or come back to it,
Mhm.
don't stop your writing process and get out of that flow state. Just mark it with three slashes, make a note of what you need, and then just continue on with your narrative. So Hannah does that really well.
Mhm.
Um, but the last thing that I want to note is what does work here.
Mm.
So when we talk about elements of writing that do work, we mean that, whether it's a scene or a paragraph or a sentence, we want everything to do work, which is to either motivate the plot, develop characters, or develop theme. And really masterful writing will do at least two of those things. Literally, with every sentence, with every word does work. It accomplishes at least two out of those three things. And when I look at this again, my feeling as I read it is it's fine, but it's just hard to connect to. It's hard
Mhm.
to care what happens next and not just put it aside when we get to the end of this. And a lot of what's here doesn't do work. I'm sort of waiting for the story to begin. So, like I mentioned, we do have some character development. So some of the paragraphs do help us to develop Julia, um, but thematically, I'm still pretty empty by the time I get to the end of the first chapter. And plot wise, I still don't really know where we're going or what's at stake here.
Yeah.
So those are my notes. Allie, did you have
Mhm.
anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we hit everything.
All right, excellent. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for sharing. I hope that that's helpful. So, if you're out there, in your mind or something, big round of applause for Hannah for being brave and going first, nonetheless. Although she didn't choose that. All right. So next, we're gonna move on to Tony Findora or Anthony Findora.
Mhm.
And Tony's been hanging around for a while too. I actually just recently learned that I met him like several years ago. I was speaking at a church and he was the sound guy or the video guy or
That's
something.
cool.
Yeah. So he's local to Ohio here with us. And but I'm excited because Tony's work schedule often doesn't let him participate. And so I am really glad that we get to incorporate him in tonight. So Tony's piece is The Great Crash of 2104,
Mhm.
which we mistakenly posted as The Great Crash of 2014, which would be a totally different story, right?
Completely. Yeah.
So, Allie, do
Mhm.
you want to get us started? Maybe first, just read the first couple of paragraphs there.
First couple?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. The Great Crash of 2104. The strange tingling sensation of teleportation overcame Clark as the teleporter in the greenhouse began to work. He closed his eyes and braced himself as he awaited his inevitable instant rematerialization in the bunker beneath their house. Dad, started Sam, did everything go all right? Clark, his eyes still shut, nodded briefly to his eldest son as he tried to get over the nauseating effects of teleportation. He sighed as the feeling passed, allowing him to get his bearings straight. He hated how much of an anomaly he was. Rarely did people get sick from teleportation.
All right, cool. Thanks, Allie.
Mhm.
So, what we have here, from what I've gathered, is a like a cerebral sci-fi kind
Mhm.
of thing that we're moving into, maybe with some like teleportation or dimension hopping or something like that, which is cool. I'm here for
It
that.
was pretty cool.
And so, Tony, thanks up front. Thanks for sharing it with us. Thanks for putting yourself on the spot to do this. That's very cool of you.
Mhm.
Allie,
Brad.
what did you take in one? If you had to take one word on this story, like one reaction,
One
um,
reaction.
how do you feel about this story after having read it, or novel
Mm,
chapter rather? It is the first chapter of a novel.
just one?
Just one word.
I have so many words. I
You
have to
got to
pick
pick one.
one.
You got to pick one.
Um, if I had to pick one, I didn't expect this question. I cool,
Cool.
cool.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Tell me about cool.
cool.
Why cool?
So it's cool. It definitely grabbed me from the beginning. But I felt like there wasn't necessarily enough to get past cool.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Where is cool on the spectrum? Like,
So there's like cool, and then there's like that was awesome. And then we're
okay.
like, that was totally rad, bro.
Totally.
Like,
Okay.
yeah,
Totally
totally
rad,
rad
bro,
is
is the
the top.
top. All right. Okay. What's below cool then?
Sweet.
Okay, so it's between sweet and
Yeah, like, "Oh,
awesome.
that was in no, that was sweet," and then there was, like, there was, like, this needs some work."
Okay. Okay. All right. So what kind of work do you see for Tony here?
So, like I said, the beginning, like, immediately captured me. Teleportation's so cool, and you don't often see that in stories. But I couldn't see any of it. There wasn't a lot of physical descriptions. I couldn't picture where people were. What does the teleportation system look like? What does it actually like feel like in his body? We
Yeah,
know it's nauseating, but I wanted to be, I guess, more in it, you
sure.
know?
Yeah, it's sort of relying on you have some pre-existing knowledge of
Right.
teleportation. So
Yeah.
you're pulling that from Star Trek maybe or something
Right.
like that in
Yeah.
order to understand what's happening. But
Mhm.
we want to see your teleportation, Tony. And so yeah, it's sort of like I mentioned it'd be a recurring theme, but I think
Mhm.
we're really missing a lot of physical descriptions
Yeah.
in here, right? So I don't have a clear picture of any of the characters, and
Mhm.
I also don't have a clear picture of any of the spaces. It's really leaves a lot of it up to me to fill it in as we go. So definitely, what else you got, Allie?
Um I felt like some of the dialogue was a little clunky,
How so?
So, like, for in the beginning, "Dad, did everything go all right?" I don't feel like a kid would necessarily say it like that, like, "Dad, is it okay?" Or,
Hmm.
I thought that was a little formal.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and with that, we don't know how old Sam is,
Right,
right? Because we
exactly.
haven't received a physical description of him
Mhm.
or a lot of information. Like Sam could be 10 or he
Could be
could be
17.
20, right?
Oh,
Or 17.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he could be 50.
Right.
I don't know.
He
I
could
don't know.
be.
Maybe he's from the future. Maybe he's the son from the future. You know, we don't know yet. And so that also contributes to that. But I did
Mhm.
notice there were some lines of dialogue where contractions weren't used,
Yeah.
where they potentially could have been. And so I agree. There was like a formality
Mhm.
to the dialogue that contributed to a feeling of clunkiness there.
Yeah.
Um, I did know what story I was reading
Yeah.
by the end of it. I have a pretty good picture of what's going to happen, and or not what's going to happen, but the kind of I know what ballpark I'm in
Yeah.
at this point.
Mhm.
My biggest struggle with the piece was just some of their writing was
Mhm.
relatively weak. So there were lots of places where there are just simply extra words involved that could just be removed.
Mm.
So if we start right at the top, I guess this isn't an extra word, but it's still a good example. The strange tingling sensation of teleportation overcame Clark as the teleporter in the greenhouse began to work. And so in that sentence, you establish up front that it's teleportation, and then you repeat the word teleporter later in the sentence.
Mm.
And that's especially in the sci-fi genre, that's an opportunity for you to present some new jargon, some new word or term like
Yeah.
um so it could be something like the strange tingling sensation of teleportation overcame Clark as the sending unit in the greenhouse began to work, or
Oh,
like whatever they call the
the
unit,
sending
the
unit.
sending unit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever they
Mhm.
call it in your world, Tony. And then after that, he closed his eyes and braced himself as he awaited his inevitable instant
Mhm.
rematerialization in the bunker beneath their house. We could strike inevitable instant from that sentence without losing anything. So it becomes he closed his eyes and braced himself as he awaited his rematerialization in the bunker beneath their house. And that really just like cleans it up, makes it
Yeah.
tighter and faster, and I still get
Mhm.
as much information. And so there are a lot of examples of that. I'm not going to go through them all, in
Yeah.
this context. Were there others that
Mhm.
stood out to you, Allie, though, that are worth pointing out?
Um, Not that immediately come to my mind. I can keep looking though.
Okay, sure. So some other items as we move through the piece, you know, on page 2 at the top, it says he then moved to the bedroom where his wife was convalescing. I love that you use the word
I
convalescing.
had
I
to
mean,
look that one up.
you used it appropriately here, but it does interject itself into the conversational flow of the piece,
Mhm.
right? Because it's not a word I've ever heard anybody use
I'm
in real
glad you
life.
said it because I would have butchered that so bad.
I mean, I hope I'm saying it right, I guess, because I've not heard it a
I just
lot.
assumed.
And so there are a few choices like that as well, where
Mhm.
it's like just use a simpler word, and it's going to work better for you.
Yeah.
There are some instances where we're repeating words, like also there on page 2, we have she sat still, eyeing her husband, and then 3 paragraphs later, he crossed his arms, eyeing her intently.
Mhm.
So there's some things to keep your eye out on there. And then we also have some telling language in the
Yeah.
piece. So
Mhm.
a few examples of that would be at the bottom of page 2. He knew he still needed to tell them all about what he found in the greenhouse, but now was not the time. Now I understand we need that information, right? Because that
Yeah.
does help to establish the stakes of the story. But at the same time, when you drop it in there like that, it just immediately pulls me out of the story. It reminds me that I'm reading a story, right? It breaks the continuity of experience that I've been having. It reminds me, oh yeah, Brad, don't forget these are words on paper.
Yeah.
And then another instance of that would be, despite the doubt, he would do anything to give her a fighting chance. And so again, you're just telling me this information. I'd much rather see that. And in fact, in the case
Mhm.
of that line, you are showing me that. You don't even need to include that. I'm a smart
Mhm.
reader. Your readers are even smarter, and so they're going to put that information together without it being spelled out for them on the page.
Right. Yeah. Another example of that is down on the page. Without the necessary assistance, his wife would die. Like, I want to see, like, what about her is sick? What
Right.
about her is like dying? I want to see that because that also introduces some more stakes.
Absolutely. And so right now
Mhm.
we're told several times that the wife is sick,
Mhm.
but we don't see her symptoms at all, right? We don't see classic movie adaptations of radiation poisoning are like flaky skin,
Right.
right? And
Are her
like,
teeth green?
oh yeah, or like something leaking out of her eyeballs or something like that.
Mhm.
That's the kind of information I want to be able to see it. And a really and a simple instance of telling would be this one. It's later on in page. I think we're on 3 here. Said he sat down on the couch next to his wife and cleared his throat. All right, you guys, we need to talk, he said, sounding serious. And so that sounding serious is a classic example of telling there. You've actually already demonstrated to us that he's serious
Mhm.
because he sits down on the couch, he clears his throat, and then in the next paragraph, that's actually confirmed. It mentions again that his kids know, what it means when he cleared
Right.
his throat. And so that sounding serious is just completely extra to this scene and could be removed.
Mhm.
We also have quite a bit of, or a number of adverbs used here. So let me find a good example of that. Okay,
Mhm.
yes, dear, she said tiredly. That's at the top of page 3. So rather than said tiredly, I'd love you to pick one word that means said tiredly. Like yes, dear, she sighed.
Mhm.
Yes, dear, she groaned. And not only does that eliminate some word count there and get us tighter, but also you're going to pick that forces you to pick a word that more specifically carries the connotation that you want, because there's a difference in her reaction if she sighed or if she groaned or if
Right.
she
Yeah.
moaned or if she you could even use like a word we don't typically associate with verbalization, like yes dear, she grimaced, right? And grimace
Mm.
doesn't mean to say, but we
Mhm.
still understand who's saying the line and the manner in which they're saying it through that word.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good word.
Um,
Grimaced. I like that word.
let's see. I want to look through, but
Mhm.
Allie, did you have other notes to share with Tony?
Um, I did like the description of the armor.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like that I could see a little bit better than uh most of the story.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did have a really solid description of the armor, and that's on about I think it's
Yeah.
7 there.
Yeah.
And I agree. That's a great description, except for a couple of things. There is a little bit of telling in that paragraph that you could just cut and it's going to tighten it right up and just make it stronger and faster. So, for instance, this line: black metal plates coalesced with gray leather like joints, providing extensive protection and decent mobility
Mhm.
for the wearer. That second clause there, providing extensive protection and decent mobility for the wearer really doesn't bring any value to the paragraph. Again, your reader is smart.
Mhm.
They can piece that together as they go. Um, one thing that's really important to remember is that your reader wants to participate in the process. They don't just want to be told everything. Actually, that's what's stimulating for our minds. That's what attracts us to reading a lot of ways, is because unlike a movie that just shows us images and it's all right there for us to take, except we just have to figure out the plot, right? In a movie. But when we're reading, we're presented with a limited amount of information, and then your brain has to do quite a bit of work to put those information those data points together and form a conclusion from it. And so like leaving out lines like that gives your reader more to do, and
Mhm.
they'll actually like you for that.
Yeah.
And then later in that description, he says on each side were two ports for interchangeable high-tech devices. And I really questioned that the in the universe of the story, they would call them high tech devices. I think this is another instance where you have an opportunity to just drop some jargon, right? You can take a
Mhm.
lesson from Dune and not even tell us what it is. You can just say for interchangeable hobbledegobs,
Hmm.
right? Or
Marcus Burgers.
whatever you want to call those things, it's totally your call. But high tech devices, again, that's what we would call them because we're looking 100 years in the future.
Mhm.
And then there are a few info dumps. And this is always challenging, right?
Yeah.
Especially in sci fi where you're trying to uh, demonstrate, a whole universe and bring somebody up to speed. But there were a couple places that stood out. I'm just going to focus on this one on page 7.
Mhm.
It's this paragraph. Clark had been a long-standing member of a security team allied with the Ascendancy when he last wore a similar suit. And it's quite a long paragraph. It's longer than most of your paragraphs there. And so we have a couple of issues here. I mean, info dumps where we just put a lot of information on the page are always challenging. But here, we're actually coming to the climax of the chapter, right? This is where it's exciting, where we're waiting
Mhm.
for things to happen. And this type of information doesn't help to sometimes we want to make the reader stick in a moment that's high tension before we let them press on to the next part of the scene. But this information actually just pulls us right out of the scene, right?
Yeah.
Like if you had focused on some scenery details and like I want to know what happens next, but you're going to make me look at the suit some more, right? Or better yet, I want to see the look on his children's faces,
Mhm.
as he's getting ready to do this thing, and they're both like amazed at how cool he looks, but also this is terrifying for
Yeah.
them, right? Like I want to know what that look looks like on their faces. Those details make me simmer in that high tension moment. But what you've done here is that you've actually pulled me out and literally sent me to another world, right? And you're like, okay, leave this for a while and
Right.
then come back. And by the time I get back, the tension has dissipated. And in this particular example, we also don't really need this information in order to understand the action of the story.
Yeah.
Do you have other
Mhm.
thoughts, Allie?
Um, I think that last kind of info dump paragraph does introduce a couple of stakes for the main character that
Okay.
we could see later on. But I agree with everything you said about like needing to, you know, stay in the action there.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, Tony, or let's ask the last question. So, of the two questions we want to ask of a novel chapter, one, we do know what story we're reading by the end
Mhm.
of it. So, well done on that front, Tony. And you've included again, the writing for me was clunky, and it needs to be significantly tightened up and improved. But you have introduced some elements that I'm very curious about. I'm curious about what this dimension hopping looks like and things like that. But the second question is, Allie,
Yes.
would you pay money to continue reading this story?
Um, at this point, I don't think I would. If someone gave me the story, I definitely would keep reading it because teleportation's cool and the suit was cool. But there's not quite enough grab yet for me to click buy now.
Yeah. I agree.
Mhm.
Like if I was on Amazon and I got this as a sample chapter, it's not quite to the place where I'm going to move on. And part of that last note is I have some little world stakes. I know sort of what's going on with the wife, and that's that makes me understand his motivation for taking this risk. But I need a
Mhm.
little bit more development on what's at risk here. and sort of like, is there a bigger world impact that we're concerned about, or is this just a family story? And even just more clarity on that question would at least help me to further refine what story
Mhm.
I'm reading and my expectations for that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you, Tony. Well done. Taking a risk, putting yourself out there.
Good
That's
job.
awesome. All right. So next, we're just trucking right through these. We're gonna do Kimber Ann Watson, The Allure of the Arabelle Moon. And I hope I'm pronouncing all those words right. But hey, that's the way it goes, right? If you publish a book, people get to pronounce your character names however they
Exactly.
want.
Mhm.
Um, so it's pretty long first paragraph there. So Allie,
Mhm.
will you read us that?
The whole thing?
Yes, and I
Okay.
actually didn't realize until this moment that it's chapter 2 and not chapter 1.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm gonna consider that as you read
Okay.
that.
Okay. Yeah, you think about that.
Yeah.
All right. Ping! The little marble shot off the yellow tin cupboard. Landing in front of the pink calico easy chair, the slight dip in the floor caused it to roll under. Down on her knees, Katie Graygrath peered as she swatted the handle of her broom to coax the marble out of hiding. Come out, wherever you are, she said. The broom connected, and the marble sped across the floor, bouncing off the front door and settling on the braided area rug. Haiti smiled. Such fun could be had for hours, but she needed to get on with her day. She picked up the glass marble and placed a piece of sticky red tape in its place to ensure she would know where to begin next time. This game was her favorite. She'd been playing for years. At one point, she tried to rally enough interest to start a league, but enthusiasm lacked. It was just as well, for her small silo dwelling could only hold a few players at a time. Tournaments would be challenging. Haiti placed her broom back in the closet, the marble in the dish on the kitchen sill, as she sang the closing song for the game. We swish and swat, we swish and sing. Oh, what joy abounds when the marble goes ping.
Cool, thank you, Allie.
You're welcome.
Lovely reading, lovely reading. All right. Excellent. So, um, first off, I love imaginative stories. I love stories that
Mhm.
take me in a direction that I've not considered before. And this story definitely does that.
Absolutely.
There's elements of the world that I've not seen in any other stories that I have trouble genrefying, right? Figuring
Mhm.
out what genre, that's not a word, I made it up. But
Brad Paquette, 2024.
figuring out what genre it belongs in, and that's cool. I also think that the story has a well considered narrative voice. Like
Mhm.
there is a specific voice that I hear
Yeah,
throughout the
definitely.
narration, and that's a big positive for me. So Allie,
Yeah.
what are some things that you see in this story?
Right off the bat, the story was really confusing. Some of the sentences were a little clunky, but I think it is about on page 2 where we get like a very sudden transition to a completely different scene. And this happens quite a lot in this particular story where we go from, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Um, the main character, do you think that's Hattie?
I said
Hattie?
Hattie. I read it
Hattie?
as
You
Hattie.
read it as
Yeah.
Hattie? Okay. Um, Hattie and then this Rupert character. And we don't get much of a transition between those scenes. And so really pulled me out of the story. I was like, wait a minute, who's Rupert? Where is he? Where's Hattie? What's happening?
Yeah.
You know?
And there are probably 5 or 6 of those
Yeah.
instances throughout this story, right?
Mhm.
And that could just be a formatting issue, like,
Yeah.
if this was a printed book and there was, like, a scene break symbol there or even a
Right.
skipped line, that would help, but we have to work with what we have printed
Right.
before us, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that was definitely confusing, and after a
Mhm.
while, I came to expect it,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, it was still jarring
Absolutely.
with each instance.
Mhm.
Alright, what else did
Yeah.
you see?
I really liked the kind of nutty character of Hattie. Um, but I had absolutely no idea. I mean, she's not human,
Yeah.
right? And I would have liked more description of the characters. Like, I think it was interesting for that to me to discover that,
Mhm.
but then I couldn't picture any of the other characters. And that really kind of made it hard to picture the story and to get into it.
So let's just give our interpretation of the world,
Okay. Oh,
and then
okay. Here
Kimber
goes.
can, on her own, I
Take it
guess,
as you will. Yeah.
see if we're right, see if our
Mhm.
understanding is
I
correct.
think she's a toy, like a wind up toy, but is like life sized.
Okay, yeah, that's kinda what I was sensing was sort of like wind up toys or almost
Mhm.
like Inspector Gadget
Yeah, like they
type
all kind of seemed
characters,
mechanical
right?
except for our our Ayrbelle Moon.
Is she not mechanical?
I don't know. It didn't seem like she was. I thought she was human,
Okay,
personally,
okay, I mean, we
but I
know that
don't
she's
know.
otherly
Yeah,
in the story, right? But not exactly how.
right, exactly. And I was reaching for that human aspect, that was me
Sure,
trying to make it make
to
sense.
connect with
Yeah.
something, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think, so this is chapter 2,
Mhm.
and, one of the things it's always difficult to start with chapter 2, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, in a live workshop type setting, they might be like, "Well, I actually explained that in chapter 1," right?
Right.
And so that could definitely be true. So there's some grace for that, but we're just gonna work with what we actually have on the page here.
Yeah.
So if you explained it in chapter 1, you can disregard, the some of the notes that we might give here, Kimber. Um, so similarly here as some of the other stories, I was really craving more description,
Mhm.
especially since it is so otherworldly. Like I
Yeah.
don't, at least like with Tony's story, if I can at least pull in a Star Trek teleporter, right, and insert it into his story, and I would much rather have his teleporter, but that'll do. That'll get the job done.
Mhm.
But here we're so otherworldly. It's I see you put steampunk in the chat there, and I recognize it's
Mhm.
definitely steampunky, but
Yeah.
it's different in some way, that's difficult to discern because of the lack of descriptions. I'm not
Mhm.
exactly sure what things look like, spaces or people. And given that it's chapter 2, I think it makes this even more acute that, I don't even know that she has a turnkey until later in the chapter, right? So, like, I would love to see that up front, or at least at first I thought, "Oh, this is an intentional delayed release of the information." You're
Mhm.
introducing a story gap, some weird elements to keep me piece through, like when she's spinning on the bridge. Like
Mhm.
that's weird, but I start to get it there, and it keeps me curious and intrigued in the story. But I do need more of that earlier on in order to really connect well with the story.
Yeah.
The dialogue formatting also made it difficult to read.
Yeah.
So typically we would break paragraphs with each character. When we switch characters who are speaking, we would break into a new paragraph.
Mhm.
And here, all the dialogue is just squished together into a single paragraph, which again makes it difficult to figure out when the speaker is changing, and also just those long text blocks are difficult to read and wade through.
Yeah. I also have that note.
The story also uses a lot of what I call fudge words. For instance, caused. So like in that right in the beginning, landing in front of the pink
Mm.
calico easy chair, the slight dip in the floor caused it to roll under.
Mhm.
Words like caused really have no value unto themselves, right? They like caused really doesn't give us hardly any information about the action that's happening. It's like you use caused, or I'll look for the created. Those are words that we use when we really are kind of pressed, right, to find a transition between two ideas. And so there's quite a number of those in here. In fact, for everybody, and this probably has something I could have mentioned in Tony's as well, there are a few words that you just do a search and find on your stories before they're done.
Mm, mhm.
One of them is caused. The second one is having, Having.
I'm guilty
Like,
of that one for
sure,
sure.
we all are, but then we look it up, and those typically identify weak writing. And if you have a
Mhm.
lot of havings in your story, just seek them out and fix them up.
Yeah.
I found the point of view really disjointed and
Mhm.
confusing in the story. So at first, we follow several different characters, but there really don't seem to be any rules about when we hear people's thoughts and when we don't.
Mhm.
It's just sort of like whatever's convenient to the narrator at the time, that's what we get. And to some degree, that's okay, right? We're not strict rule followers, but because the story is already sort of confusing and I'm already sort of grasping to follow the story as it goes, things like that really start to erode my connection to the story, and any kind of firm footing that I have starts to erode because of that.
Mhm.
Um, And so Allie mentioned, confusing
Mhm.
passages. There are quite a number of confusing passages throughout. Um, and see, I just have a couple more notes here. Did you have
I do
something?
have one.
Yeah, go for it.
Something that was confusing was the layout of the town, especially because we're going back and forth. When we're first with Ayrbelle and Hattie, I thought it was like just a single house on the first floor, but then there were stairs, and I was like, how many stairs are there? And it seemed like she was on the third floor, and that was really disjointing for me.
Mhm. Yeah, there's the scene with Lady L. I was
Mm-hmm.
having a lot of trouble understanding those relationships and sort of where everybody was and why the boot was tangled up. There's just a lot of confusion, and so I sort of just had to accept it and then just keep moving on. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to figure out exactly what was happening there. Um, and yeah, I think those are my major notes for
Yeah.
Kimber today.
Same here.
Did
Yeah.
we miss anything?
No, I don't think so.
All right, let me just take one more glance through here and
Mhm.
make sure that that I didn't miss anything. I was intrigued by the characters.
Yeah. Hattie
Kindred.
intrigued me for sure.
I was really intrigued by the bird thing in
Really?
the cage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
like Go ahead.
like. I want to keep like I would want to keep reading just to figure out like
Yeah.
what is this bird
Mhm.
thing, and is it like an Edward Scissorhands situation where these are like real humans and
Mm.
animals, and they've
I didn't
been
even think about that.
mechanized or something?
Yeah. I liked how nutty Hattie was. She was like, "Oh, she's sweet. I like her. I connect with her on a personal level."
Excellent. Excuse
So,
Tell a joke or something.
Brad spilled coffee on me the other day.
That's a true story. Right before we walked into a conference, like minutes before. Just
Yeah, that's
yep,
my joke.
yep. Hilarious story, Allie. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again, Kimber, for sharing your story with
Mhm.
us.
I have the 2 questions
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
we asked.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're
Go ahead. You
welcome.
asked them.
Um, do you what's the first
Do you know
question?
what story you're reading?
Do you know what story you're reading?
Um, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, but
Mhm.
I would definitely like more development to know what the primary conflict is,
Yeah.
because we have so many different characters kind of competing for stage time here. I'm not I think Hattie is the main character, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Arabelle, maybe it's the bishop and it's like an anti-hero thing.
Maybe it's the bird.
Maybe it's the bird, Rupert, I think.
Mhm.
So I could use quite a bit more clarity on who the main character is and who I'm hoping for in this situation, but at least like genre-wise and kind of what kind of content I'm getting into, I think I have a pretty good plan, a pretty good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say the same. Would you buy it?
No, I would not. Not at this point. It's too confusing for me.
Yeah.
I would need a lot more clarity in the descriptions and in the action sequence, and even just in the
Mhm.
formatting to really feel like I had a solid promise that the rest of it was gonna be, at the quality I would expect.
Yeah. Mhm. I wouldn't buy it, but I would be thinking about it as I
Yeah.
walked out of the bookstore, and I think that's important to note.
I think it passes the dishwasher test, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's like when you're washing the dishes, what are you thinking about? And so, like, I think this is a story that because it's kind of nutty, kind of
Mhm.
imaginative, like, it'll come up in my mind
Yeah,
later
I'll
on.
be like, "What was Hattie? What was she?"
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Thank you
Good
again,
job.
Kimber. All right. Next, we're going to move on to Susie Kirk, which is the story Reconnected.
Mm.
So Susie, I think she's in New York City, maybe, but she's been coming to our workshops for quite a while. So it's really good to see you again, Susie. And I've really loved working with Susie because um, I've seen her work improve through the
Mhm.
workshops as we've gone. So that's very cool. I applaud your tenacity there, Susie. But Allie, will you read us the first paragraph?
Absolutely. Reconnected. It was a late June evening that Doris decided to attend the church in her area. Although she'd been living there for quite some time, she always made up excuses as to why she could not attend. The main reason was that the church was too small. Unlike the large one she was accustomed to while visiting family in the city, this was a small church in a rural area of the South. That word is so hard to pronounce. Rural.
Rural. Yeah.
Rural.
Nobody can say that word. All right. Thank you, Allie. Okay, so we have a really big story here, right? So we're moving over a number of years, and the type is pretty large. So I would guess that it's not that long of a story. It's probably under 2,000 words, I would wager. And so we're really covering a lot of ground with this story right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I would say that probably the biggest issue that I had with this story was fluency.
Mm,
And when we say fluency, what we mean is, did it sound nice? And it's one of the hardest things to teach,
yeah.
is fluency, because there's so much gut involved, right? And it's also pretty subjective. But as we're reading it, it doesn't quite match the professional quality that we're used to reading in, published books and things like that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Allie?
I felt like a lot of it was more telling than showing. So like for an example, in the first paragraph, she tells me that the church was too small, but we never get a physical description of the church.
Yeah,
Describing how it's small or how the pews are cramped together or how, the preacher stands 5 feet from the front row or any descriptive, really like things that you could put in there that would show how tiny the church is, and I find
yeah.
that throughout the manuscript or throughout the chapter, I mean.
Yeah, and I think, on a bigger scale, like, we
Mhm.
don't have physical descriptions, but we also don't have specific moments in this
Yeah.
story, right? We have a lot of generalizing,
Mhm.
like Ali said, we could call that telling, where it's sort of like it was generally this way at that
Mhm.
time, but very rarely does the story settle into a specific moment, and then that moment is developed with, physical descriptions and dialogue and things of that nature. We do get it a little bit right at the end. She
Mm.
has this encounter with God where and so we get some details like she continues to plead her case before the Lord, asking for forgiveness. Tears and more tears roll down her face, washing away the shame. Lying in a fetal position, crying, she feels his presence. And
Mhm.
so, like, we're getting there in that moment where at least we're existing in a specific time and space with Doris and not just hearing like the Reader's Digest version of the story. So I think you're moving in that direction, but I would encourage you to figure out, look at your story now that it's all on the page and ask yourself, what's the moment of the story?
Right.
Like there's one specific point in the story where everything changes. And that should be the focal point of the story. That's what you really develop. That's what you build out, and make sure that you have all the physical descriptions and all the dialogue is there in that precise moment in time that happened in a specific place in the world. And then, like, after you've established that in your mind, then you ask, okay, what details are important for the reader to understand that moment, to
Mm.
understand the
Yeah.
change that has happened in that moment. And that's how you craft the story, sort of backwards, right? Is start with that moment. And sometimes that moment is at the beginning of the story, sometimes it's the middle, sometimes at the end. So it's not necessarily a prescription. But and in this story, I think the moment, there are kind of two moments, right?
Yeah.
One where she initially hears this sermon, and then a second one when she has this second come to Jesus moment. But I think the second one is probably what your target is for the story. And so I would just love to see that moment built out again with those physical descriptions and things, and then have you ask the question, what needs to support that moment and build out to those other elements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so within that, I want to know who Doris is.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I have a sense of that. In fact, in the beginning, typically, if I know the author and I don't know anything else, I imagine the main character to be like the author, right? And so I am, but the first page here, I think Doris has to be very young. And
Mhm.
Susie, I'm not calling you old by any means, but you're not like 19 or 20. I'm pretty sure. And so that threw me off because I'm imagining more like a middle-aged woman,
Mm.
and so I need that character description up front that
Yeah.
helps me to picture who this person is, how old are they, is all those kinds of
Mhm.
details.
Does she have hair?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Does she have alopecia? Things like that we need to know. Um, And so throughout, we could definitely use those character descriptions. I also need more formatting on the dialogue. So
Yeah.
there's no quotation marks in the story. We don't really have any dialogue tags. So I'm
Mhm.
left to completely figure out on my own through context who's talking and when they're
Mhm.
talking.
Yeah.
And then finally, in addition to thinking about the moment and building out from there, really take some time to consider the narrative voice of the story.
Mhm.
And this, of course, all these notes would be true for everybody, but I think this is especially important for everybody who's telling the story. And when I say that, I don't mean that it has to be like a character on the page who's telling the story, but nonetheless, nobody gets more word count in a book or a short story than the narrator does. And so that narrator is like a biased journalist, like the way they describe things, the kind of adjectives and synonyms that they use influence the way that we understand the story. And sometimes that brings just taking the time to picture that and say, what kind of person is telling this story and how do they color the world? That brings a lot of that fluency and clarity and kind of
Mhm.
smoothness to the story itself.
Yeah.
Do you have other notes, Allie?
I think my only other note, and it's kind of on narration and stuff, is that the tenses changed quite a bit
Yeah.
through the story from present tense of like this is happening to like past tense, this did happen.
Mm.
And that pulled me out of the story.
Yeah. Cool.
Hmm.
And I love the subject matter, Susie. I'm
Hmm.
always down for a story about the redemptive power of Jesus. So
Absolutely.
stay after it. Keep going. You're
Hmm.
getting there. So keep moving forward. Thanks for
Yep.
sharing it with us, Susie.
Hmm. Are we going to do the two questions?
Well, this is a short story.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Right. There you
So
go.
questions don't matter.
What do I know?
All right. So that brings us to piece numero cinco, which is Jesse Plowman. And Jesse's from Chicago, I think. And she actually Chicago-ish, okay? Chicago adjacent. And she came to visit us last spring, which was very cool. Thanks for coming, Jess. And so here we have chapter 2. I was aware of that when I read
Hmm.
this one. Um, and so same note there, right? Like there might be stuff included in chapter 1 that you're like, well, I did explain that in chapter 1, but all I have here is chapter 2. So that's what all of our feedback is going to be based upon.
Hmm.
So Allie, would you kindly read the first paragraph there?
Yes, I will kindly read it. I will
Thank
not
you.
read it meanly. When he woke again, it was late the next morning, or possibly the next millennium. He dreamed thickly of humid summers on Earth, mud, Spanish moss, tobacco smoke, lightning bugs, and gambling men. Also, remote but intrusive pains rationalized in absurd ways. Your daddy says a cheese grater makes beards grow thicker. Bet this bench vise can make your head look like the Great Wall of China. Quit fiddling with your fishing rod and stick it through your rib cage, hands free.
Cool. Thank you, Allie.
You're welcome.
All right. And I was just reading Jess's note there. She says chapter 1 is a mess. She doesn't know if it's going to even be the same stuff. All right. Well, we'll give you what we got on chapter
Hmm.
2 here. And I hope it's helpful. So, I think that there's a number of positives with this chapter.
Yeah.
I think that you have a really well developed narrative voice.
Hmm.
Like I have a sense that someone specific is telling this story, and I don't know who. It doesn't matter who, but there's a consistency to the way things are phrased and the color that's given to the action of the story. So I like that a lot. I'm very interested in the character. I
Hmm.
felt that it was well
Yeah.
developed. I want to know more. I could possibly use a little bit more physical description, but I am going to give you a little credit that in chapter 1 is typically where that would mostly take place. So I could use a little more physical description, but I was jiving with the nature of the character. It seemed
Yeah.
like a real person to me, seemed like a real young man. I'm guessing. Actually, let's play that game.
Okay.
Who is the main character? Like, what are they like? How old are they? Stuff
Oh.
like that.
Uh, older teen, kind of rugged, maybe like a bad boy, just a little.
Yeah.
I was into that.
Okay. Yeah. I was picturing like 19 to 20-year-old
Yeah.
white guy, kind of slim
He is
and
in jail. That's right.
muscular. Um, Probably like a buzzed head.
Yeah, yeah, with like maybe a little fringe
Yeah.
out front,
Okay.
just
All
a
right.
little.
Yeah.
Rugged clothes, kind of almost I was picturing through the story, kind of like space, but a little bit Western too, you
Okay.
know?
Yeah.
Just a little.
Yeah. I figured he was wearing like Timberland boots. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
Lots of like maybe a leather jacket.
Maybe. All right. So Jess, you can figure out if we're on target or not. But anyways, I thought the character was interesting.
Mhm.
I liked the way that you strategically laid out the information to keep me moving through the chapter.
Yeah.
You
That was
opened story
exciting.
gaps, you made me curious about something, and
Mhm.
you kept me curious about it for a with good rhythm, and then you'd
Mhm.
resolve that and you'd give me something else to be curious about. So
Mhm.
I thought that that was well done and kept me moving through the story. I didn't have any sense of like when will this be over. You
Yeah.
kept me moving through with a good rhythm.
Mhm.
Um, what about you, Allie? What's some of your feedback? I have negative stuff too. Don't worry. Don't worry.
She doesn't get special treatment.
Nope.
Um, some of the things that really stood out to me, were the physical descriptions. I said I got like that space western type vibe, but I was reaching for that. Like I wasn't exactly sure. Specifically in the jail cell, when his cot turns out to be fiberglass. I thought that was an interesting detail, but it threw me a little bit. I was picturing like, rusty metal in the jail,
Mhm.
and so then I was like, "Oh, fiberglass, like, what does that even look like?"
Yeah, you're really into space western at this
I
point.
am,
So,
I
so
am. Lawless plug. No.
all right, and I was confused in
Mhm,
a few instances. So, actually, in that first paragraph that Ali read,
mhm.
second part of that paragraph, I have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I like the also remote but intrusive pains rationalized in absurd ways. That's like a nicely poetic line to like think about a hard childhood, right? And I like that he dreamed thickly. That was a cool phrase. But then the examples are hard for me to understand and imagine, especially quit fiddling with your fishing rod and stick it through your rib cage. Like, I don't know how you survived that. Like, I was almost with you on the others, but that's weird unless there's some kind of like
Mm,
alien race or something that can
yeah,
do weird things to their
mm,
bodies. I don't
yeah.
know.
I thought dreaming thickly was a little weird, if I'm gonna be honest.
That's fine. You
It
can
took
think,
me
you
out
can
of
be
the
wrong.
story.
You're allowed.
I am.
Um,
And so are you. No, I'm kidding.
And then the line right after that, insane or not, it had been full and sanguine. I
Mm,
mean, nice vocabulary word, but coming off the confusing description, it was still difficult to really get there.
mhm,
And then on page 2, we have this paragraph, something else. This is right at the top. Something else. It was harrowing that his grandfather hadn't come. He'd come for Rail, not even his own family, when Dane called last time begging for help. There was no point asking for bail then. Even so, Thad was not without influence. He was the settlement chaplain. He'd reasoned with the marshal and pleaded with the stationers. He'd argued forbearance and patience as far as he could, made things better for Rail and detainment. And we're getting just so many names there. There are
mhm.
either 3 or 4 characters involved. I don't know if Thad is grandfather, if those are the
Yeah.
same person or if they're different people. And none of them are actually present in the story present in the scene here. And so we're developing 2 or maybe even 3 characters remotely all at the same time. And so that was really challenging. Like if you removed Thad and there was just Rail. And actually, is this the first time that we learn his name is Dane as well? I think it might be. I could be wrong about that,
Yeah.
but Dane at first, I'm wondering if that's a different guy as well.
Mm,
And so yeah, it's just too many characters. You could develop one character remotely, and start
mhm.
introducing, seeding something for later. But to have that many names dropped on me all at once
Yeah.
was too difficult to follow.
I have the same note.
Um,
Mhm.
And another line I liked on page 3 was, "Nothing changed like yelling at a painting." Did you like that
Yeah,
one?
I have a check mark next to that one.
Alright, good, good, we agree.
Mhm.
And I'm just reviewing here to make sure there aren't any other notes. What other notes do you have, Allie?
I do have a couple word choice notes where it kind of threw me and it was a little clunky. So like on page 4, the warming sun stilled the breeze and he sweated. That just kind of was a little awkward to me, you know.
The
Um,
sweated part?
yeah,
Yeah. Sweat's a hard one to
it
tense,
is.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it just sounds
sweated.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one's on page 5. The crying choked away and he stopped ringing to listen. I had a hard time picturing that. I didn't I ringing I've not heard as a term before.
Which
Used
was
in
it
like
again?
uh on page 5, the crying choked away and he stopped ringing to listen. I assume he stopped like shouting and screaming to
Yeah, I think
listen.
he's like banging on the bars, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that threw me a
Yeah,
little.
you're right. Yeah,
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
it takes a moment to get there.
Yeah. I will say, I did like the dialogue on page 6.
Where he's talking to the little girl.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I have one small note on page 8. Jess, there is a point of view error. The line, Ethan recognized something in the tone, something he didn't trust. You should come with us. So, previous to that point, we only know Dane's thoughts and nobody
Mhm.
else's. And there we have access to Ethan's head.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other notes, Allie?
Um, I did have a final note on page 9. I was a little confused on the dialogue. There's art cutters in the marshal's closet. I'll cut the whole thing down. After reading it a couple times, I figured out it was Dane, but I had to read it a couple
Cool.
times to figure it out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Good notes. All right. And so, do you know what story you're reading?
I believe so. I believe so. I feel like I'm reading a story about somebody who's on like a planet that's been settled,
Hmm.
and then all the grown-ups are dead.
Yeah.
And I'm into that.
Right. So, yeah, definitely has post apocalyptic off world
Yeah,
vibes.
for sure.
Okay,
For
cool.
sure.
And yeah, I agree. I
Mhm.
know what story I'm reading. I know what kind
Mhm.
of trope universe I'm in for this, and I
Yeah.
mean that as a positive.
Mhm.
And would you pay money to continue reading?
I might. I might be tempted. I would probably think about it a lot in
Mhm.
in the bookstore or on Amazon. I'd debate it.
You like put
It'd
it
be one of
back, and
those
then you
moments.
walk away, and you
Yeah.
come back later
My friend
again.
would be like, "Just buy it." And I'd be like, "I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna enjoy it, but
Yeah,
maybe I will." And then we'd be in line. And I'd be like, "I'm gonna go get it. I'm gonna go get it." And then I'd come back and I wouldn't have it. It would be a whole thing.
right. Yeah, I think I'm very curious to read next to see what happens, but I'm not compelled to read what
Mhm.
happens next. And so, like we've said, with a lot of the pieces, I don't have a clear idea of stakes yet.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the big mission is. I
Mhm.
don't know that Dane has, great power or great responsibility or
Awesome
uh
hair.
great hair even. And so I want a little bit more. I want another element that just compels me. And it's like right now, I want more. I'd like to hang out with Dane longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't typically pay $15 to hang out with people. So I want you to give me something that I have to know what happens. I have to turn the next page.
Yeah. Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess. Um, and so that's the last story. Jess, like I told the others, great job putting yourself out there, being brave and taking a risk. So
Good job.
I hope that this has been helpful for everybody. And Susie asked a great question to wrap up with. So I'm going to answer her question. And Allie, if you want to read it, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Okay.
But I really appreciate everybody who's been here with us tonight. Again, I hope that this is helpful for you. Hope that like James says, don't just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word. That's the Brad Pauquette standard version. Um, but uh, it's important that you now take this information, you compare it to the other stories, right? You
Mhm.
challenge yourself to improve in that with that critique muscle, because as you get good at critiquing other people's work, you get better at critiquing your own work, right? And we usually have the most blind spots for our own work. So really, again, just continue or encourage you to actually take this information now, do the homework, right, and look at the original stories and improve. So we'll answer Susie's question and then we'll take care of any last minute announcements. And I think Jess had an announcement related question,
Mhm.
perhaps. All
Yeah.
right, cool. So Susie asked, when there's a limit on words, what should you focus more on? The plot, description of characters, all of the above, or a little of each?
Mm.
So that's a really good question. So I assume like when you're submitting to like a flash fiction contest or a magazine or something, and they're like, there's a 1,500 word limit, right? What do you focus on first? Allie, what do you think about that?
I think you need to have a balance of everything because each part is important to the story. That's why it's in the story. That's why we talk about it. That's why we point it out. Um, I feel like you would have to have a little of everything for it to be a cohesive, understandable story.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think we consider those the essential ingredients. Like the
Mhm.
essential ingredients of a cake are flour, water, eggs, and sugar. Right? You need those. If you leave one out, it's not a cake anymore.
Mhm.
it might be good, but it's something else, right? And so similarly, a story is plot, characters, conflict, and setting.
Mhm.
And those are the four essential ingredients to a story. And so they have to be present for it to be a story. Like if you leave out plot, it's not a story. It might be a vignette, might be something else. If you leave out a different element, again, it's not a story. It might be a poem, might be
Mhm.
a thought piece, might be something else, but it's not a story. And so it's important that all four of those elements are represented in every story. Now that said, uh, they're not always equal, right?
Mhm.
Like a literary fiction story will have a higher emphasis on character than on plot. A sci-fi story adventure will have a higher emphasis on plot. A sci-fi story will have a higher emphasis on setting
Mhm.
usually. So that would be my second consideration is, yeah, we need to develop all four, make sure they're present on the page, but what type of story you're trying to tell will be your biggest indicator as far as what you tend to emphasize a little bit over the others. That's a really good question, Susie.
Mhm.
All right. So, yeah, and Jess had a question. If you do a novel writing class this summer, is it going to be start from scratch rules like NaNoWriMo? That's such a good question, Jess. I am not a fan of rules, because here's the thing, like the point isn't to win the game. The point is to help you reach your goals as a writer.
Mm.
Right. So if it's better for you to start from scratch, we'll resource you to be able to start from scratch. So if you're like, I want to write a novel, but I don't even know where to start, maybe you've written a novel before, but you're just feeling like the well is dry, we'll help you through that to develop the idea from scratch. But if you just need the motivation and you already have the idea, you already have something that you're working on, but it'd be really helpful to get in to with some other people and have somebody else setting a deadline for you and pushing you to meet that. Awesome. That's great. We want to resource you to reach your goals. And that's really one of our values
Mhm.
around here, which kind of drives the apprentices crazy when they first get here a little bit,
We like
actually.
the rules.
Yeah. They're like, but how do I get a good grade? And I'm like, there are no grades. I keep telling you this.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Um,
just figure if I make him laugh, I'm getting an A.
Still not true, though. um, so yeah, our heart is to resource you for that stuff. So again, yeah, that novel writing class or cohort is coming up this summer. Stay on the mailing list for that. I'll be releasing the novel matrix, so I hope that you're on the mailing list for that. There'll be ways that you can participate in the release, and I would love your help with that if you're available. And then Allie has a cool thing coming up in June. Your serial, your episodes, your Facebook Live.
Oh,
You
yes.
should you should,
Yes, I remember
pump
those.
that just
Yeah, so I will be going live on, Facebook and Instagram 3 times a week. Sometimes I'll be reading my old writing and critiquing it with a friend, cringing at it, trying not to burn it. Um, Sometimes I'll be telling stories about what tools have helped me the most, in my writing, like Scrivener or like Canva. And then, the last set of videos will be just stories of things that Jesus has done at the 2 years that I've been here at the school. So definitely, check that out on my Facebook and Instagram.
yeah, and I think
Mhm.
you're starting that May 20th, right?
Yes, I am.
But people, if they're watching this, they should just go follow you on those
Right,
platforms right at
exactly.
this moment, right?
Yep, Instagram is, I believe, Allison Prince Author, or it's Alli Prince Author. I get confused.
You should really
I
know
should
that.
know
You're
that.
the expert
I
on that
am.
subject, so,
Yep.
uh But in any case, check those things out. Keep your eye out for the next workshop. We're
Mhm.
still everything we do here is an experiment. We're still figuring out if we're going to continue this format, if we're
Mhm.
going to maybe alternate between the peer review and the professional review format or what. So
Yeah.
keep your eyes out. We'll announce that in the next week or so here, but we'll do something next month, and we'd love to see you at it.
And if you liked this, let us know. Send an email or drop a comment on the page.
Actually, if you didn't like it,
Let us know.
Also
Yes,
let us know.
please, we
All
can
right.
take it.
Yeah, we've given enough
We'll
to
only
take. We could
cry a little bit.
All right. Well, I'd love to pray and then we'll wrap up here. So please join me. Lord Jesus, we just thank you so much that you're at work here. And actually, if you have prayer requests, please drop them in the chat. We've seen
Mhm.
God do amazing things in this format, seen people get healed over Zoom in our Arcure classes and things. So if anything that you'd like us to just agree with you, invite Jesus into, please drop it in the chat there and I'll include that. But Lord, we just thank you. I thank you for each of those five writers that did. That's not just flattery. I'm so impressed that they would uh, put the work into writing something, and then that they would put it out there and say, "Yeah, tear it up and help me get better." So I pray that you'd bless them, Lord. I ask that you bless Hannah and Kimber and Susie and Tony and somebody else. And Jess. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
right there.
I know she's right there. But Lord, I just thank you so much for how they put themselves forward, Lord, and how they're diligently pursuing the dreams that you put on their heart, or that they're taking it seriously, that they're not just brushing it off or pretending that they can take the easy path to follow you into this big thing that you've called them into. So I thank you just for your hand upon them, Lord. I just pray that they would see tenfold increase in their writing quality, in their writing skill, and their writing productivity. And I thank you for them, Jesus. Yeah, Lord, I do lift up Jess's dog. Father, I pray that you would just we ask for complete and radical healing of Jess's dog, Lord. No more seizures. Um, that he wouldn't have to take his medication, Lord, because you come that you completely healed his body. Lord, we ask for peace and patience over Jess's household, Lord, that you give her wisdom and discernment as she walks that out with her dog. We just thank you that your Holy Spirit is with her now in her home and wherever she goes. So I thank you so much for each one that's come here tonight, Lord. Even for those that watch the recording, Lord, we just invite your blessing. And we thank you that you love us. We thank you that you take care of us. And we pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, guys. Well, again, thank you for coming. It's been great to hang out with you guys for a little while, and hope you're on the newsletter list. And we will see you again at Stuff in the Future.